Hola amigos, bienvenidos a un episodio más de Chain Reaction Talks. Mi nombre es Laura Mayo.
Y yo soy Itzel Cadena. ¿Te gustó, güey? ¿Te gustó? All right, I'm sorry. El día de hoy tenemos el grandísimo honor de entrevistar a una celebridad del mundo de CrossFit.
Es correcto, señores y señoras. Un súper invitadazo.
El juez de jueces, el verdugo de los CrossFit Games, Adrian Bozman. Mr. No Rep.
Bueno, yo no sé quién es, pero no, sí sé quién es. Gracias a Itzel.
Ya lo conociste, ya estuvimos platicando con él. Fue una plática muy chida que es la que les vamos a pasar a continuación. Aprendimos muchas cosas. También nos habló mucho de cómo definir un estándar, las trampas que se pueden hacer en el Open, la evolución, casi ninguna, la evolución del deporte como tal. Creo que fue una plática muy chida y además de que se le ve como que en otro esquema, porque los que lo hemos conocido, lo hemos visto en competencias, o sea, es un vato que se ve que como si fuera muy serio, muy mamón, obviamente por el lugar que representa, pero la verdad que a toda madre, súper humilde, muy chido y muy abierto para responder nuestras preguntas. ¿No lo crees, Laura Mayo?
Es correcto. De hecho, creo que las preguntas que se le hicieron, que sabemos que es parte de la comunidad y todas las preguntas que tiene la comunidad como tal, estuvieron muy interesantes y creo que la comunidad crossfitera mexicana puede aprender mucho de esta entrevista.
Es correcto, amigos. Así que esperamos que les guste. Ahí va.
Disfruten la entrevista.
All right, so we have a great guest today. I think he needs no introduction, Mr. No Rep himself, Adrian Bozman. How are you doing, Adrian?
I am great. Really happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so we gathered a little bit of questions from all the Latin America community that they wanted to make you. These are questions just a little bit about you and about your work and about this season, all right? So
yeah,
let's
awesome.
just go ahead and get started. So first of all, for all the people out there who just starting, maybe don't know you, could you tell us a little bit about your background, your story in CrossFit? How do you get to it?
Yeah, absolutely. Excuse me, I started doing CrossFit myself in 2004. And by 2005, I was the only thing I was doing fitness-wise. And then in 2006, I started coaching. And then 2007, I started working for CrossFit, the main company. So I've been involved for a long time. I've been lucky to kind of see it grow from a pretty small, fringe element to something that is now worldwide and pretty mainstream, which is pretty cool. It's been an amazing, opportunity to see that happen. And then over the years, I've done a lot of different things for CrossFit. Worked on the seminar staff for a long time, worked with the education department for a long time, and then I've also worked with the games. And just recently, my role shifted in January of this year, and so I'm focused entirely on the games now. That was something that I would do seasonally and something that I would do in conjunction with other responsibilities I had, but now it's my sole focus. So pretty exciting. So yeah, full time with the CrossFit Games now.
That is amazing. That is amazing. I was just listening to that in this podcast as you had with Tommy. Another thing about this is that I admire a lot about your story. How did you start? You started with Kelly started, right? And you did circus too.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that was pre-CrossFit. I was studying acrobatics at the San Francisco School of Circus Arts. That was a long time ago now. It feels like another lifetime. And then I started dabbling in CrossFit, and I did it on my own for a little while with my friend Sean. And then Kelly was the only gym in town at the time. He was the first affiliate in San Francisco. And, my friend and I, who were doing this on our own, he said there was somebody that had opened up a gym and we should go check it out. And so we did, and Kelly and I hit it off. And I ended up coaching with Kelly for 5 years, from 2006 to 2011. And then I had the opportunity to go and coach in Australia. So I left San Francisco CrossFit in 2011. coached in Australia for about 6 months, and then we came back to the United States. So yeah, it was a blast coaching with Kelly.
Oh my God, you've been all over the place. Laura,
yeah.
you go.
Okay, so how did you become the head judge of the CrossFit Games?
You know, that's a great question. And it really was just kind of an organic development. In 2007, the first games happened and I didn't attend. It was such a small event that at the time it was just kind of like, oh, are you going? I don't know. You know, you didn't really think much of it. And my wife and I had something else going on that weekend. I don't even remember what it was, but we couldn't attend, so we didn't. And then in 2008, they said, hey, we're going to do it again. And at that time, I'd been working with the seminar department and, you know, running seminars and working that. So I already had a little bit of responsibility within the company. And Dave said, hey, you know, we could really use your help at the games. I said, okay, sure. So I came out, and by the end of the weekend, he was calling me his head judge, and it just kind of stuck. So we've been we've been doing that ever since. So it really was, you know, at that time, it's hard to look at the games now in 2021 and see how big everything is and how well developed it is, and go back to 2008 and just how small, you know, like it really was a small event that just had a lot of passion behind it. And yeah, it's tricky if you haven't been involved with something like that, that's really just in its starting point, like its infancy, it's hard to describe. And so I think people look at it through the lens of today, and they're like, wow, what do you mean it was right time at the right place? It's like, well, that really was what happened.
Yeah.
It just doesn't seem like that's possible when something is already so big, you know, but it wasn't always that way. And I guess that's I'll ramble a little bit, but I think that's important for people that get involved with things on their local level, is that, you know, you never know where it's going to go, and you never know how big it can be and how impactful it can be. So don't be afraid to get involved with something when it's just starting out. It's a great, exciting time, you know. Everybody should do it.
Yeah, that is a great advice. And I was watching this documentary when everything started, just in aromas. And I'm wondering how was it that it started to think, well, you started to think that you had to judge the movement, like the scoring had to do with judging the movement? Was this because Greg was a gymnast and just kind of like try to do the same kind of scoring that they do, like a sport of appreciation? Or how do you think it was just not, you know, it's not working to just count reps? You actually have to see that they're doing the movement correctly according to our standards. How did it get to that conclusion?
That's a great question. And, you know, I think you can see the start of that in some of the early CrossFit Journal articles. Like I'm trying to think, maybe the first one that I remember something like that. There was an article about the perfect push-up in maybe 2005 or 2006. And you can still go look that up on the website. It's great. I encourage people to do that. Those old CrossFit Journal articles are great. But there was one with the push-up. It was called the perfect push-up or something like that. And then there was another one, I think it was called like 3 abdominal exercises everybody should do. And it had the GHD sit-up in there. And both of those articles talked about the importance of training through a full range of motion, and how, you know, you have to establish like a starting point and an ending point for the movement, especially if you're interested in comparing, you know, your progress to what you've done in the past. If you don't have an objective set of standards for what does this movement look like when I start it and finish it, how do I know if the effort that I did a month from now compares to the one that I did initially? And so I think that's always kind of been part of the CrossFit culture in terms of, you know, what we're interested in is results, and results have to be recorded and you have to look at them objectively. And so it really just kind of sprung out of that. I think it, again, it was very natural to say, okay, yeah, each one of these movements has a starting point and an ending point. There's certain things that have to happen in the middle. And it just really grew from there. But yeah, I think that came from the culture before CrossFit as a sport was really ever even talked about. That was just part of what you did. Yeah.
And how do you decide the standards of a movement? Like, because I
That's a
know,
great
like
question.
some movements are pretty obvious. Like, for example, a squat is pretty obvious where it starts, where it begins. But like, for example, in this year, the wall walk, I thought it was a great standard. I thought it was great, but when I did it, I realized, you know what? I don't do it like that. I actually just go up, and when I go down, I just bring my legs down. I mean, I don't go all the way down. So how do you go to that conclusion and kind of decide this is the hardest way to do the movement, so this is going to be your standard?
Well, believe it or not, it doesn't always have to be the hardest way. But what we do want is, you want to think about what are you trying to accomplish with the movement? Like, what is it that we want people to be able to display? And so you kind of hold that idea in your mind. You're like, all right, we want people to have the control, in this case, to get up the wall and back down. And then you start playing with that and you think, okay, what would people do naturally if they didn't have a standard at all? And you're like, well, they'd get to the top and then they'd use the least amount of energy possible to get down to the bottom.
Gravity.
Okay, well, does that really match with what we're trying to test for? If you want somebody to control the bottom of the movement and then you don't have something that accounts for that, well, they won't. So, all right, we need to come up with something that holds you to that. And so it's always a bit of a balancing act between, you want enough rules that everybody's doing the same thing. But if you create too much within that, it gets confusing and people don't know what they're supposed to be doing, or they forget something, or they don't read something. And then it just becomes arbitrary. So it is kind of this balancing act between enough structure that everybody's doing the same thing and simple enough that you can adopt it quickly and actually do it. And that evolves over time, especially with a new movement. When we do something the first time, you don't know exactly how it's going to turn out. And then especially with something like the Open, you have hundreds of thousands of people that do it and you see what comes back and you're like, oh, okay, hold on. This played out a little bit differently than what we thought. And then, so, you might adjust next time based on that.
Yeah, exactly. And right now, like in the Open, I think a lot of people, when they see a workout for the first time, they're not thinking, okay, I'm just going to do it. But they're thinking, how can I cheat this? I mean, like all the new things that you do in a movement, it's normally coming from the Open. Like the first time they switched the dumbbell snatch, right here. Came just for thinking, how can I cheat this? It's like this Greg Fikowski did a great Open workout. It looked so clean.
Oh yeah.
But I saw a lot of people that was just kind of jumping from okay, so I need to touch here, I need to touch that. What can I do to cheat this movement, right? Okay, Laura, go.
Okay. Well, best and worst experience judging at the games.
Oh, best and worst. Wow. I really have to think about that. I mean, best experience, I think, is hard because there's so many good experiences. Like the whole thing is a great experience. It's stressful, it's tiring. It's, oftentimes you're not sure how it's going to play out. You don't know if you're doing a good enough job. You don't know if people are going to actually want to see it. So there's a lot that goes into that. But at the end of the day, when we pull it off, because there's so many moving pieces and so much organization that goes into it, I mean, it's a great feeling. So I think the best is just being involved in it every year and getting to see it play out. I don't know that I can think of like a single best moment. And same thing with the worst. I guess the worst is when, again, I can't think of a single moment, but the worst to me is when there's something that happens where an athlete did not get to display their full potential due to something that, was out of their control, either on the equipment side, you have like a piece of equipment that fails or, isn't staged correctly or something like that, or something happens that is outside of their control that prevents them from showing their training effectively. Those moments always feel bad in the moment. And so then the job becomes, how can we resolve this fairly so that despite the fact that there was, a bad circumstance, it's resolved in a way that you can move forward. But I don't know that I have a one that stands out to me. I do remember one at regionals. It was late in like the third day, I think. And I was with the judges and I was briefing a standard, and we were moving quickly. It was a movement we'd been over a lot already. And I completely misspoke. Like it was like a 180 of something that we'd already talked about. And everybody was super confused. And I couldn't understand why they were confused, because in my mind, I had said it correctly. But I didn't. I'd made a mistake. And it was just a mess. But yeah, little things like that.
And I think it's very, it's got to be a hard job because everybody gets mad at you. Like, I mean, really, you're the head of the judges. And I've been in many competitions when, you get mad at the judge, you're kind of thinking even like, this judge actually hates me. He wants to see me. He wants to see me fail.
Right.
And well, at the end point, they go to you. So how do you control these emotions? Like I remember this, Kara Webb, you remember that at the games, with that problem, it must
Very
not
much.
been comfortable for you because it was not your fault, but you had to resolve it. So how do you control these emotions at the games and at these big stake competitions?
Well, that scenario is actually really interesting because, it was unfortunate that a mistake was made, and it was clear to everybody that it was a mistake. Number one, that judge is great. He has a really good track record. He's usually very, very on the ball, like one of the best on the field. But everybody has a moment sometimes, and so that was unfortunate, especially for him because he's usually such a top performer. It's unfortunate for Kara, obviously, because it was such a heated moment. It was close to the end of the competition. I mean, you never want a mistake like that, but especially at that time. But I really, going back to the question of best worst, I think you could look at that on the outside and think that was a worse moment. But I was actually really proud of the team because despite the fact that there was a mistake made, we were able to resolve that fairly and so quickly that it really didn't affect the competition. It created a lot of drama, obviously, but we still had a fair outcome really fast from that. And that was because the team was ready to deal with it. So the preparation that went into that paid off, obviously. Now, in that case, Kara Webb, she's an amazing competitor, and she wasn't rattled at all by that. I went back and talked to her immediately after it happened. I said, hey, we're going to look into it. We're going to make it right. You just need to give us a little bit of time. And she was like, yep, no problem. Total pro.
Yeah.
So that it really makes the job, I wouldn't say easy because it's still hard to get it right, but it definitely makes it a little bit less stressful. On the other hand, you'll have people that come and they're very emotional. They're right in the heat of the moment. They're upset with something that happened. They disagree with the call on the field. And I think a lot of times it's really just knowing why people are frustrated and why they're upset, and understanding that, yes, they're so amped up from competition anyway, that how could they respond anything but very emotionally and not taking that personally. I think that's a big part of it. It's like, it's not, even if it's directed at me, it's not to me personally. It's frustration with the scenario. And once you understand that, I think it becomes a lot easier to recognize, okay, we can work through this. You just need to let them get it out. You need to hear them out. And then let's get to the bottom of what actually happened, and then we can resolve it. And I would say the majority of the time, once people have had the chance to vent, and once they've kind of gotten it off their chest, and you take a step back and you start looking into actually, what really happened, you get both sides of it, you come together and you meet about what's going to happen moving forward. With a little bit of time between the incident and then the resolution, most people are pretty reasonable. They come around and they say, okay, hey, I was in the moment. I didn't mean to get upset. Like, most people are pretty good about that, even if they don't like the resolution that ultimately comes from it, which does happen. So. Yeah.
And now talking about that regarding this season, or what's been of this season just so far, what do you think? I'm asking this because we were talking also to Shane Orr and Corpoli about this, about this season and what has happened. And I think the Open was great. And some people are thinking that the organization is going to learn a lot from quarterfinals, because, quarterfinals were a little bit crazy, and 10%, it showed maybe it was too much of a window. I don't know. What do you think so far of this season?
I like the fact that we have more opportunities for people that are like not just the top performers to compete and compete with people that are, hard competitors. Uh, I think we've always had a pretty good path to the games, and that represents like that really small percentage of people. But I do like the fact that we have, a lot of like that 10%, those people are diehards, they train hard. They're the fittest people in their gym, fittest people in their city, fittest people in their, whatever. So I think it's cool that we're giving opportunities for people like that to compete more. So I hope we continue to do that. I think that's definitely a goal. To your point, though, we definitely learn a lot. And, that's the first time from a kind of technical behind the scenes standpoint, that's the first time that we've run an online competition with that many people with that short of a resolution. And so that was a big challenge, was to, get that happening and to work out the logistics of that. So definitely learned a lot there. I think we learned a lot about, kind of the difficulty on a global level of what those events need to be. You take something like the Open and it's obvious, okay, this needs to be hard, but what makes it hard is what people put into it. The workouts themselves need to be accessible. People need to be able to do them. And then the best can separate themselves by really throwing themselves into it. When you get to a second stage and it's a bit more of a qualifier where people have already qualified into it, the question of finding the right level gets a little bit trickier, because you want it to be hard enough now that you're starting to weed people out further that need to advance to the next step. But again, it can't be so hard that that bottom of the bracket completely falls apart with it. So yeah, I think we're going to learn a lot about finding that particular level and narrowing that down for that stage of the competition season.
Yeah, for sure. All right.
Laura.
Okay. Well, I'm curious, what did you think? I mean, you guys, you're the ones that, you did it, you saw people doing it. Like, what? I'm curious to hear your experience about that.
Yeah. Okay. So I have about 10 athletes that made it to quarterfinals.
Oh, awesome. So, congrats. That's great.
Yeah, thanks. But I had mixed emotions because of those. Okay. I think it was like 5 of them that could do all the workouts. I mean, not awesomely, but they could do them, and they enjoyed it. And I had 3 that did not enjoy that and got a little frustrated. I think it was because more of the weight, like for example, the last workout with the snatches, I had 2 athletes that couldn't even lift it. So that was a little bit frustrating for them. But I think I just saw it like that, like what I'm telling you. I think they're going to learn a lot. I think everybody's going to learn a lot. And I think
for sure,
one thing that happens at the Open a lot is you get your first movement. Like my first muscle up happened at the Open. So awesome. I think that that adrenaline helps a lot. So yeah, It's the first time, and I'm pretty happy about what Eric and the organization are doing right now. I'm so psyched that it got back to February, and I think the 3-week Open was great, because what happened to me at my box is that a lot of people got in, but not a lot of people finished.
Yeah.
So right now with 3 weeks, that was great. It kept the people very excited. It kept the people doing the work, and it kept the people thinking, all right, it's almost over. So,
yeah, you can hang on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think that was great. Quarterfinals, I think it's going to change a little bit, and I'm sure you guys are going to learn a lot from it, but I think it's a good start. Yeah,
cool. Yeah. And so to speak to your athletes' experience a little bit, I always think that I'm curious as to the motivation after experiencing something like that, where you're like, oh, it was too heavy, I couldn't do it this year. For some people, I feel like that's really hard, because they're like, I've trained so much, this is demoralizing a little bit. And then other people are like, oh, now I know the level I need to be at. And then they really get after it to try to get there. So I'm curious to see how that affects some of those people that are on kind of the bottom of that bracket, that, the 9 and 10%ers, that they're right there. They're fit, no question, but they're not quite there to hang with the top guys yet. Does that motivate them for next year? Be like, okay, I know where I need to be at this stage of competition, and they're, that much more, I guess, focused. So I'm curious to see how that plays out on the global level.
Yeah, I think for sure it's going to be interesting.
Okay.
All right, go.
How is the process for reviewing videos?
Oh, it's lengthy. It takes a long time. Yeah, that's a really good question. So we have a decentralized team that is all over the world, especially for the bigger competitions like the Open and quarterfinals. Let's take quarterfinals because it was a unique scenario. The Open, we have a lot of time. The athletes have a lot of time. Yeah. They've got 5 days to submit their score. We have a lot of time on the back end to start reviewing those scores. So everything's I wouldn't say it's relaxed, but we certainly have more time. For something like the quarterfinals, it's like, okay, we have these very narrow windows. We want to try to resolve the leaderboard quickly after everything's finished. So the time crunch is a lot tighter. So for that competition, we had a decentralized staff around the world of experienced judges from past competitions, people that have helped with the Open, level 1 seminar staff, stuff like that. And they each have a team lead based by region. And then those team leads report back up to us at the kind of the central level. So the process is when an athlete submits their score, their video will get reviewed, and that'll be initially reviewed by just one of the judges we have on the team. And they have certain criteria that they're looking for. And they basically go down the checklist and look for, okay, does it have all these things? Yes or no? And then after that, what do the movement standards look like? And they'll take some notes on that. And if it's something that is needing more review, they'll push that up to their team lead. And so then their team lead will review it and see, okay, what do I think? Do I agree with this judge? Is there, something else that needs to happen here? And then if the team lead isn't sure, then they'll push that one layer up to us, and then we'll take another look at it. And so, oftentimes, if there's a video that somebody submits and they receive a penalty or, something needs adjustment, it'll be looked at a minimum of 3 times before anything happens with that. So it's a pretty in-depth review. Obviously it's a lot of videos, especially with a competition that has so many athletes in it. So it does take time. And I think the tricky part with a competition where you're really just at your own gym competing and you don't get to see what happens with everybody else is that when people do have their scores adjusted or they do get a penalty or something like that, they feel like they're being singled out because they can't see what's happening behind the scenes to the rest of the field. Yeah. And so that's a hard thing sometimes. Athletes reach out to us and they're like, hey, I feel like I'm the only one that's getting this treatment. And we're like, no, trust me, you are not. We have people working around the clock. Like there's no way that this is only you, It might feel that way and you don't get the sense of what's happening to the other athletes, and you don't really get to see, the original scores of athletes and then what they turn out to be once they get adjusted, things like that. And so I think that's a hard process to manage sometimes. We do everything we can to make sure the competition is as fair as it possibly can be. But I think it's really hard for the individual to see that when they don't get to, be around the rest of the competition, so to speak. So I think that's one of the hardest parts of running an online competition is you just don't get that sense of everybody doing the same thing sometimes. So yeah, that'll be another problem that we want to get better at solving and better at communicating about.
Yeah, I love about the quarterfinals. I love the floor plans. I think that kind of help making the work a little easier. Yeah, I mean, in my experience, it doesn't make it so much easier for the one that's in the box. You have to move a lot. But I think in the long run, it makes it easier to even judge. So what recommendation can you give to the athletes to make your work easier and even their performance a little bit more fair?
Just step things through before you start. I'm always surprised at the number of athletes that just set it up and go. And they don't take the time to, okay, I'm going to set it up and I'm just going to walk through and make sure that I can see everything on the camera. I go back, I look at that video, it takes 5 minutes. Turns out I can't see this part of my body over here. I need to, play around with that a little bit. So yeah, taking the time to step things through, do a couple reps at each place, make sure that you come back and watch that. I think that's a huge, huge step in the right direction. So yeah, just taking a little bit of time before you start going. That's a big one. And then I guess on the back end, doing the same thing with your submission. I'm always surprised at how many videos get submitted where you end up watching it and you're like, I can't believe that you submitted this and thought that this was not going to have any sort of penalty or, any sort of ramification. Like, it's clearly not meeting the movement standards or clearly not set up correctly, and they just submit it anyway. And I'm like, man, that's all that does is frustrate you, because now we have to come and talk to you about it. We don't want to have to do that, and it's more work for us, because now we have to, go through the whole video and make sure that, hey, it looks, if it looks disorganized from the beginning and the movement standards right out the gate are not good, well, then it's going to get a lot of scrutiny,
Yeah,
so,
I know.
Yeah, so athletes and the coaches should just make sure to take the time to watch their video before they submit it on the back end. I think that would be a huge step for most.
Yeah, I think it's like kind of hoping there's so many people out there that they're not going to watch my video and they're just going to pass. Yeah, I know. I've heard it.
Sure.
Do you see any difference in judging athletes from different regions?
What do you mean? Like, in what way?
Like, I don't know. Do you see maybe, this region is a little bit more clean, or check out for this region because sometimes they do this or that? No?
Not really. I mean, honestly, it's, I think that has more to do with the experience level of the athletes than the region. Like, you have experienced athletes from every region that really know what they're doing, and it's clear. Like, they set up the video, it's very deliberate, everything's organized, and then it makes everybody's job easy. And then you have less experienced athletes that they're not as polished with those details, and you can tell. So I think it has very little to do with region and more to do with, just how many competitions you've been engaged with, and, what kind of culture your affiliate has around that sort of thing. I think that makes a bigger difference than the region, at least in my experience. I haven't noticed any definitely if we see videos from the Asian region, they tend to be more like this. Not that I can tell anyway.
Okay, cool. Laura.
Okay. Is there some kind of ranking to choose which judges participate in major competitions?
Yes, but it's not so official. But yeah, we definitely choose people. And if we're talking about in-person competitions specifically, we definitely look at people that have been involved in the past. We look at people that have, participated in not only our events, but more local events. And based on that, that's kind of our first preference. So if we look at the games or, in the past when we did regionals, that would be where we would start. We would try to invite back people, or look for people that had volunteered that had already been there previously, and try to select from that group first. And then once that group was kind of exhausted, then we would start looking for people that had, requested that particular event, that had experience maybe not as recently, or, not as much. But you try to start from those group of people that have been around. So that's how the games works very much so, is we keep an ongoing roster. And when it comes time to staff that, we try to invite back the same people year after year after year. Granted, they have to perform well during that year, right? So if they have problems, or they're not, to the standard of the rest of the field of judges, well, then they might not get asked back. But those that are doing a really good job year after year after year, we want to continue with that good momentum and keep them involved. So yeah, it's not to go ahead.
Yeah.
No, that's okay.
Okay. I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
Have you had to take out a judge, or kind of have to fire a judge in the spot?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely happened. It's never usually as dramatic, and I wouldn't recommend it for people that are organizing competitions. I don't think it's a good practice to do it on the field in front of all that does is erode confidence in the event, I think. And so, but yeah, it's definitely happened where, there's been bad calls, there's been inconsistencies, there's been people that just, for whatever reason, they just can't maintain the same level of professionalism. And yeah, between events or between days of competition. You say, hey, great, thanks for your time. We really appreciate it, but we don't need you back tomorrow. That happens for sure.
Wow. That's amazing. In order to judge a high-level athlete, do you choose a judge randomly, or is it some kind of major requirement to judge, like, let's say, a Tia or a Fraser?
Yeah, and again, like if we're talking at the games, we have confidence in the roster of the judges that anybody that they get assigned with is going to be great. So we don't go and try to match one for one. Okay. And one of the biggest reasons for that is that you don't want to play favorites. You don't want people to think that you're playing favorites. And that's as much for us as it is for the athletes. It would be a shame that an athlete who performs well and has worked all year and multiple years to get to that level of competition has, fans doubting their ability because they think that there was some favoritism being played or something like that. Like that's a real shame when you have that much work that then comes into question because somebody thinks that they got an unfair advantage. So more often than not, well, actually all the time, we don't assign, like I said, judges one for one. But what we do a lot, and what we're very mindful of, I call it the best friends and worst enemies clause. So if you are best friends with somebody, meaning like you know them, you train with them, you work out with them, you've had contact with them outside of the competition, in like that kind of manner. Or on the other side, you have had a bad experience with them, they've had a bad experience with you, you have some sort of past history. Either one of those scenarios, we're going to switch you out. But we're not going to go the other way and say, okay, Itzel, you are paired with Matt Fraser today. No, we don't go that way. But we will go the other way, that if you have past history, you shouldn't be judging that person.
For sure. Okay, cool.
Oh, okay. So do you have to deal with the athlete's ego, or how do you deal with that?
That's a great question. Yes, you do. But I would say, I've been pretty lucky. We've been doing this a long time, and the CrossFit community is still very similar to what it always has been. And most people, they're passionate. They can get upset in the moment. They can be emotional during competition, but when it's all said and done, they can step away from that. And there is, usually a pretty reasonable resolution. I hope that doesn't go away. But yeah, sometimes you just have to let them get it out, and then that's it. It'll resolve itself naturally. But yeah, you have to deal with some ego from time to time, and I think that's the nature of any sport.
Sure.
Thankfully, I don't feel like that's a problem in our sport. I don't feel like that's something that is rampant. It's just heat of the moment. Sometimes things get a little bit amplified. I'll put it that way.
For sure. Ready. All right. So has there been a moment when you thought the standard you set was a mistake, or maybe should be changed or switched?
Yeah, I don't know about mistake, but I think definitely changed. And you see that, in different movements. I don't have like a specific example of, we put something out and we're like, oh, that was obviously, needed to change immediately. Not off the top of my head anyway. But we definitely always look at those things, and we definitely think about, okay, how can we make this simpler and still fair? Or, sometimes it needs to be a little bit stricter because we didn't like what we saw. But yeah, that happens all the time. And I think that that's something that is, I don't know, some people have mixed opinions about that. I know that there's some people that really feel strongly that there should be like a set way to do something, and then that's it, and it doesn't change. And so, for example, when you're doing a burpee, you always know what that's going to be. And I can see that. On the other hand, I do think that part of the sport is being ready to adapt and change the way that you're approaching something. And so I think there is room, and should be room for modifying things from time to time. Not so much that it becomes a completely different set of rules, but I do think there's room to introduce a challenge to people that makes them approach a movement in a way that maybe they hadn't in the past, even if it's not the way that they train it specifically in their gym. Part of CrossFit is being adaptable. So I think that there is room for that to some degree. Yeah.
For sure.
Okay.
Yeah, we definitely evolve the standards over time. No question.
Yeah, and change a lot. I've seen like, for example, even with the burpee, sometimes you can do it with both legs. Sometimes you can't do it one and one at the same time. It's like it has changed. That is cool, though. That is cool. It keeps you on your toes.
Yeah.
Okay. How would you describe a good judge?
Somebody who is not interested in personal gain. I think a good judge is somebody who really has the event and the competition placed as their first priority. The whole goal behind having judging in the first place is just to make sure that you have a fair competition and everybody is doing the same thing. That's the ultimate goal. And so sometimes, to speak more broadly about that, you look at a competition and you're like, the judging is a little bit loose. Okay, well, as long as it's loose for everybody, it's still fair.
Yeah.
Same thing with if it's strict.
Yes.
You're like, you might not like it, but if it's strict for everybody, it's fair across the board. Great. That's the best possible outcome, is that it's fair for everybody. Yeah. So a good judge on the individual level understands that. They're kind of, they're aware of obviously what they're supposed to be doing with the individual movement standards, and they understand the flow of the event. They have to have done their homework on that end, but then they also have to understand the bigger picture of how do they fit in with the rest of the field of judges. And so if and when they have to get a little bit of feedback from somebody like myself, like a head judge that comes over and says, hey, you need to be stricter about this, or you're being too strict about that, they need to be willing to adjust. So there's a certain element of flexibility there. And then again, I really can't stress enough how they have to kind of put themselves aside for that competition. It's not about them. It's not about them being recognized on the field. It's not about them being able to, judge superstar athletes or, be in the most prominent lanes in the competition field or anything like that. As soon as you start thinking along those lines, you're not focused on the right part of the job. So that's, to me, what a really good judge is. They know their job. They've done their homework. They understand the event. They understand how to fairly apply the standards. And they're a team player. They're not afraid to kind of put themselves aside for that job.
Yeah. Now, thinking about that, I've seen the sport evolve, and as it has evolved, you try to make it a little bit more automized so you don't depend or you don't rely always in a person, because as humans, we all make mistakes. Like, for example, the chips. Before we didn't have the chips. Now you have the chips to know what's the exact time an athlete crosses the finish line. Do you think, like, trying to guess into the future, that there's going to be a time when you can rely more in maybe machines or softwares and less in a judge and a person per se? Do you see something happening?
I don't know. I'm definitely curious to see like what kind of technology can be developed that could offer a solution for something like that. But I don't know that you'd ever move away from having that human element. In the same way, like I look at a lot of other sports that have been developed for years and years and years. You look at, American football or basketball or, soccer or whatever. These games have been played for decades, and there's still dispute over calls that happen on the field, despite the fact that they have such a rich history. Everybody knows the rules, everybody knows what the outcome is supposed to be, but yet there's still disagreement on the field. And so I think about that a lot. And I don't think you can escape that totally, especially with a sport like CrossFit, where there's so much repetition, there's so much variance in what's happening from event to event. But I do think that it's likely, I should say, that we'll get to a point where there's less and less reliance on that individual judge. I don't think they'll ever go away. I think there'll always probably be a role for them. But I think, to your point, you'll start to see more and more things kind of get off of their plate. Like we're not manually recording times anymore, or at least not using that as the primary method of score for time. Stuff like that. I think you're going to continue to see that as technology evolves to support it.
For sure. Okay. What are the biggest mistakes you see people make in video submissions?
Just not watching it before they submit it, like we talked about earlier. I'm always surprised at what people will submit and just hope that it's either we just won't get looked at, or I don't know. I don't know what the thinking is sometimes. Just watching it ahead of time. And I guess I understand the mentality of like, I'm just going to do it and put it in there. But what I don't understand is that then when they get called on it, they get mad at us. And I'm like, well, all you had to do was watch the video. I mean, it's clear.
For sure.
And in some cases, it's so clear. It's like, it said to do 10 reps and you did 7. Don't get mad at us when we come back and say, hey, you didn't do the workout.
Exactly. For sure.
So I really think it's simple. It's the biggest mistake for video submission is just not watching your own video. That's it. I mean, if you did that, it would resolve so many problems.
Totes.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. You go.
Could you give us some advice to those people entering different competitions online in order to diminish the window of mistakes? Besides the watch your own video.
Yeah, I think a couple of things there. Number one is find a judge in your affiliate or wherever you're doing the workout that will actually hold you to the standard. I think a lot of times when you're doing a competition in your own environment, it's easy to have like your best friend or just somebody who you train with all the time, and they want you to do well, obviously, and that's great. But they do that to the point where they're like, oh, I just let this slide. And then the athlete, they might not even realize that they're not meeting the standard anymore. They're kind of hoping that the judge will let them know. The judge wants their friend to do well. And so they don't really enforce as well as they should. And then the video gets reviewed. And then, people are disappointed when something has to happen because of that. So I really think it's important to have a judge that cares about you enough to hold you to that standard. It's really, really important.
Exactly.
Because if not in the moment, it's way worse to have it happen later on.
Yeah, they're not doing you any favors.
Yeah,
exactly.
Maybe have the balls to say no rep if you didn't make the rep.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, having somebody that's actually going to hold you to the standard is huge. I would say, practice a few reps of each movement in the workout in the order that you're going to do it before you start. That's a huge one. If you can get used to, okay, the workout, I don't know, let's just say it's got 50 reps of everything, do 5 at each at the speed that you think that you're going to be moving, and have your judge watch it, record it, watch it on camera, make sure it looks the same way that you think it should, make sure that the judge is actually going to hold you to it. A little practice run like that doesn't have to be the whole workout. It shouldn't be, in my opinion, but get enough of a taste of that event so that that when you go to do it for real, you've got confidence in your performance. Yeah, I think those would be the 2 biggest things. Yeah, make sure you have a judge that's going to hold you to it. Do a quick little practice run and make sure that it is what you think it is.
That is awesome. How can a person become a judge at the games?
At the games, it really starts on the local level. Get involved with local competitions, get involved in your community when you have, weekend throwdowns and some of the bigger events in your part of the world. Start to show that you can be consistent in applying the standards for those competitions. And what'll happen is as you develop the skills and the reputation there, you'll be asked to, do more and more of these competitions locally. You'll develop a bit of a name for yourself. And then as that happens and you start getting invited to more of these bigger competitions, that's when we can start looking at your, kind of judge's resume, for lack of a better term, when it comes time to pick people for, certain positions at the games. So when the games volunteer registration opens, we have a lot of volunteers for the teams and age group divisions for the judges at the games. And that's one of the first things we look at. Have you judged at the games in the past? Yes or no? Great. Did you do a good job? Yes or no? Great. If you haven't, okay, what have you done on a local level? What kind of experience do you have at some of the bigger competitions in your region? And so we start going down the list that way. So best thing that you can do is get involved on a local level, do a really good job, start to make a name for yourself, and just keep at it.
All right, awesome. And now the last questions from your experience. Last one. What you have seen in Latin American region. What can you tell? What do you think about the Latin American region? What do you think that there are some things that we could work on to improve and try to get into the level of our American community friends?
Yeah, cool. I think the first thing that stands out to me immediately about the Latin American community and CrossFit is just the amount of passion. I mean, it is awesome. It is so awesome to see. It really makes me so happy. Like I just think back to when I first started getting involved in CrossFit and just how, like, it really does take over your life for a time. Like you get so involved and you're so excited about it. And I just see that reflected in the Latin American community. It's awesome. Like it really brings me a lot of joy to see that. So that's great. I think with any sport where you've got, pockets of the world that started a little bit later than others. Like, for example, in North America, we're lucky. We're kind of at the base level. I would say that like Europe and Australia kind of caught on next. And then I think you guys, like South America, like Latin America, that's kind of like next in line. And then I think Asia is kind of behind you guys as far as just development and total time in the sport. So I think what you can do to learn from that is kind of look to those other regions that developed along a similar path, but are maybe just a little bit ahead in terms of timeline, and see what they did, see what kind of competitions they started running when they started getting a little bit more popularity, see, kind of how they approached, creating opportunities for people to compete, creating a culture of competition that's fair for everybody. Kind of look to your neighbors and see what they did. Specifically, I guess I would say, give it time and be patient. I know that's not the answer people like to hear, but you have to let things develop. And that's like on a personal level. I think sometimes athletes in regions like that, they look to the superstars and they're like, all right, next year it's going to be me. You're like, no, it's going to take 5 or 6 years. You have to go through that process. And as a coach, I'm sure you see that all the time, right? People like, all right, next year's my year. You're like, no, 4 years from now, it's going to be your year, but not
for
next
sure.
year.
For sure.
But you have to keep training so like it's going to be your year.
Yeah, exactly. I think that expands to the entire community, right? Sometimes you see what's happening in the level of organization, some of these bigger competitions, you're like, next year. And you're like, well, maybe in a couple of years, we just have to go through the steps, and you have to be comfortable going through those steps and celebrate them when you do. So yeah, just enjoy it. I mean, it's a great time to have that kind of groundswell, to have that popularity and the passion. Enjoy it. It'll get there. Just time, patience.
Yeah. I want to thank you so much for your time, so much for taking our invitation to come here to this little podcast. I really appreciate it. It was an honor to talk to you, and I hope to see you again soon.
Yeah, that'd be great. And thank you guys. You guys, such an organized podcast. I love it. You got great questions, and you guys are on it. So keep it up.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Y para toda la gente que nos estuvo escuchando, muchas gracias. Recuerden suscribirse al canal y nos vemos en el siguiente episodio. All right.
Bye.
Awesome. Thank you guys. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Okay, take care.